Okay, we are now introducing a concept of limiting reactant and excess reactant. And you are already familiar with this. Think back to like day one when we started stoichiometry and we're looking at the cookie recipe. If you're trying to make cookies, you go to your pantry and you look to see how much of each ingredient you have. If you only have a quarter cup of sugar, well, that's going to limit how many cookies you can make. You don't have enough sugar to make the whole recipe. So that's your limiting reactant. It limits how much can be made. Everything else you have left over is your excess reactant. So if we're looking at the table example, let's say we have 800 legs. Well, from 800 legs, we can make 200 tables. If I have 500 tops, I can make 500 tables. Well, obviously, the least number, the 800, is going to limit how many tables I can make. The maximum I can make is 200 tables, because if I try to make 201 tables, I don't have any more legs. So therefore, the legs limit how many tables can be made. The tops are in excess, where they're left over, and the maximum number of tables I can make is 200. Okay, now we're going to look at limiting reactants in terms of chemical reactions. Now, how we're going to do this is we're going to figure out how much Cu2S I can make with the copper, how much Cu2S I can make with sulfur. Whichever one makes the least amount, that one's my limiting reactant. And that is essentially what I did with the table example. I figured out how many tables I could make with the legs, how many tables I could make with the tops. The smaller amount, that was made from my limiting reactant. So we're always going to be doing limiting reactant problems from moles to moles. I'm never going to give you anything more complicated than that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out, well, how much Cu2S can I make from 2.5 moles of copper? So my copper, I have 2.5 moles. Now, how many moles of copper sulfide can I get from that? So moles of Cu comes down. Moles of Cu2S goes to the top. I have a 2 next to the Cu, a 1 next to the Cu2S. So if copper is my limiting, and if it's completely used up, I will be able to make 1.25 moles of Cu2S. Now we have to do a second train track, and that's for the sulfur. So I have 4 moles of sulfur. Moles of sulfur comes down. I want to get to moles of Cu2S. It's a 1 next to Cu2S, a 1 next to the sulfur. So if sulfur is my limiting and all my sulfur is used up, I can make 4 moles of Cu2S. Now you have to ask yourself a very difficult question, which is smaller, 1.25 or 4? Well, clearly the answer is 1.25 is the smaller number. So therefore, my limiting reactant limits how much can be made. My limiting reactant produces the smaller amount. So my limiting reactant is the copper. Therefore, my excess reactant is the sulfur.
Second example, identify the limiting reactant when 12 moles of HCl reacts with 10 moles of magnesium. So we have limiting reactant problem because it says what is the limiting reactant, and we have 12 moles of HCl and we have 10 moles of magnesium. So what we need to do is figure out how much of a product that we can get from each reactant. So let's use hydrogen, though you could use the magnesium chloride, it really doesn't matter. So we start with our magnesium. So we have 10 moles of magnesium. And let's figure out how many moles of hydrogen we can get. So moles of magnesium comes down, moles hydrogen goes to the top. I have a 1 and a 1, so it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if magnesium is the limiting if magnesium limits the reaction, then I'm going to get 10 moles of hydrogen. But now I have to do the same thing with the HCl. So I have HCl. So 12 moles of HCl, and let's figure out how much hydrogen I can make if all the HCl is used up. So remember, just go to the same product each time. So moles of hydrogen goes on the top, moles of HCl goes on the bottom. I have a 2 next to HCl and a 1 next to hydrogen. Units cancel. And if HCl is the limiting reactant, I get 6 moles of hydrogen. And now you ask yourself the really hard question, what's the smaller number, 6 or 10? Obviously, 6 is the smaller number. So my limiting reactant is HCl, and my excess reactant is magnesium.